Hello again. Now soon there will be new gender-based violence laws. That's after Parliament passed new key GBV bills. The Criminal and Related Matters Amendment Bill, the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill and the Criminal Law Bill aims to change how GBV cases are actually treated. Let's chat to UJ GBV researcher Lisa Vetten about this. Lisa, good afternoon and thanks so much for your time. So how significant are these three bills and how will they really help our victims or survivors of gender-based violence?
Of the three, I would say that the legislation amending the National Sex Offenders Register is the least important. In fact, I'm not even sure it's going to make any meaningful difference at all, and better energy would have gone into creating something along the lines of the Department of Social Development's Child Protection Register, for example, if they'd wanted to pay attention to university students. But that bill, I'm afraid, is probably just a knee-jerk reaction to popular demand, but it's not going to make any meaningful, substantive difference in the long run. The other two pieces of legislation are much more important and much more significant. So the amendments to the Criminal Procedure Act are important because they address issues of intermediaries. So they allow for people with intellectual disabilities, as well as older persons, as well as witnesses who are undergoing severe psychological stress and would be very stressed if you put them in the witness box. It allows them to test via closed-circuit television and via intermediaries. So I think that's very beneficial and very important and to be welcomed. It also puts in place much tighter bail in relation to domestic violence. So previously you had a situation where a woman would go and report her partner for domestic violence, the police would arrest him and then immediately release him on police bail. So he'd be out within hours, back to harass and assault. That is no longer permissible. And I think bail conditions have been tightened up. In fact, you can now allow a woman to come and give her particular concerns around her safety if her partner is released on bail. And that's important because I think for many women they did withdraw because they were fearful of their safety and how angry their partner would be. That's important. There's also, I think, some important changes in that where somebody has been sentenced to a domestic violence-related crime and they've been sentenced to more than 7 years, you're actually allowed, the victim is now entitled to participate in parole hearings and give her thoughts around what should happen. So I think those are all, that's important. In relation to the Domestic Violence Act, I think here we have some important innovations, but the test will be whether or not the Department of Justice and Police can implement them. So we have things like a domestic violence safety monitoring notice. I think why that's significant is that if you have certain situations where somebody is really very dangerous, and you can see that a protection order is not having an effect on them, a safety monitoring notice would compel the police or oblige the police to regularly check up on someone's safety to see if they are okay. That's important, especially if you were to couple it with those new provisions around bail. It also allows for a repository for electronic applications, which means you could check around the country, and you could also make electronic applications online. And also places a whole new set of duties, which would still have to be written on the Department of Health, on the Department of Higher Education, on the Department of Social Development, departments who haven't traditionally played any kind of role in the Domestic Violence Act. Well, to have the makings of a comprehensive response there.
Well, Lisa, the aim here, what they're hoping this will do, is to sort of make existing laws and policies more victim-centered. Which of these do you see actually doing that?
I would say that some of the amendments to bail and definitely the Domestic Violence Act do that. But the aim is not just to make legislation victim-centered on paper. You've got to make it actually victim-centered in practice. And that's my concern.
And what are your concerns? Because that was my next question. It's wonderful to have all of this on paper, but do we have the ability, the capabilities to actually let this translate into actually saving a woman or a child's life?
Probably not. I think if we look at the implementation of the Domestic Violence Act, which has been the best studied, we've seen very significant problems with implementation. Those have been long-standing, and in 20 years, there haven't really been the kinds of efforts needed to make them to make the implementation more effective. And I think the Domestic Violence Act, welcome as these amendments may be, doesn't address those underlying problems of implementation, especially in relation to the police. And I think we can see right now how many problems we have with the police in relation to firearms control amendment, just in relation, I think, to their management, to the extent of corruption, the failures to take disciplinary action against their members. That's not being addressed by the legislation. So I think what we'll need to, if this is to be meaningful, We have to hear from the police what they are doing to clean up their act, why they are not disciplining their members when they fail to take action that they should, what kind of training they are putting in place. Because at this point in time, we see, you know, and you hear this often from those who work in police stations, that the people the police send on training are those who work in the dog unit and are those who work in administration. Those are not those who are policing domestic violence. So there's got to be much better implementation. We need to have actual detailed reports on what is being implemented. There's not enough detail on that right now.
And let's talk prevention as well. I mean, we want to get to the stage where our women and our children are not in any danger, where they are not threatened by anyone. And I think key to that, Lisa, and disagree with me if you want to, the National Register for sex offenders will play a very big part in that when we know who's in our area and who's in our children's spaces or who's around us.
No, unfortunately not. There is no evidence whatsoever from other parts of the world where sex offenders registers have been implemented and where they've been made public, that they've had any difference whatsoever in securing safety. I mean, one of the things people have to bear in mind if you're talking about children is that in South Africa, especially for children under 11, about 70% of offences are committed by family members. So actually, it's not the stranger next door you should be worrying about. It's a member of your family. It's your friends who you should be paying attention to. It would be so much better if we invested money into things like providing safe aftercare for children after school. I'd like to talk about the sex offenders, the child protection register maintained by the Department of Social Development, because that's more important than this sex offenders register. You only go on the sex offenders register if you've been convicted on a crime. Those who harm children at schools and in other places don't go through criminal procedures. They go through school disciplinary inquiries and labor disciplinary processes. That doesn't end up on a sex offenders register. So those people could continue to be re-employed. And you think you're safe because you've checked the sex offenders register and they're not there. So I think sex offenders registers are extremely overrated. They're an overinvestment of money and time into things that really are ineffectual and not meaningful. We would do much better to look at how else we could be protecting children.
Right. Lisa Vetten, thanks very much for that. Well, 3 bills, but good on paper, but can we actually implement them to keep our women and children safe? It seems not at the moment.